I was fully awake when they left me in that hospital bed, not unconscious, not dying, just inconvenient. They walked out while I was staring at them, and none of them even looked back. But the boy they abandoned didn't stay broken. He lived, he learned, and years later, they ended up working for the company he secretly bought. People love to say betrayal is silent. Mine wasn't. My name is Ronan Vale. I was lying in a hospital bed, ribs feeling like crushed glass, right leg strapped in metal, when I heard every word as clearly as the heart monitor beside me. I couldn't move much, but my hearing was perfect, and that hurt far worse. Through the thin hospital curtain, I heard my Uncle Garrick whisper, "He's no use to us anymore." My stepsister Mara answered, "If we sign the refusal papers, the state takes him. It's cleaner." Cleaner? I remember staring up at the ceiling tiles, trying to breathe through the sting swelling in my chest. I wasn't asking them to save me. I wasn't even asking them to care. I just wanted them to stay until I fell asleep. Instead, they walked out. The last thing I saw through the tiny window was Mara's satisfied smirk as she adjusted her purse strap and turned away without hesitation. That was the night I learned that survival and worth are things you build, not things you're given. That night changed everything about who I would become. After they left, the nurses didn't know what to say. One placed a blanket over me with gentle hands. Another whispered, "I'm so sorry, honey," her voice cracking slightly, but pity felt like another wound. It reminded me that I was now officially unwanted, unclaimed, and alone. The rehab facility they transferred me to smelled like metal and bleach. The walls were always cold, painted that institutional green that makes you feel like a number instead of a person. The staff rotated so quickly that no one remembered names or faces. I spent my mornings learning to walk again, gritting my teeth through physical therapy that felt like torture. I spent my nights learning not to break again emotionally. Something hard settled inside me during those months. Not bitterness, I didn't have the energy for that. It was resolved. Resolve is quieter than anger. It's colder, it lasts longer. It doesn't burn hot and fade. It smolders deep in your chest, waiting for the right moment to become something unstoppable. And I felt it growing every single day. People underestimate what loneliness turns into when you stop fighting it and start using it. With no visitors, no family, and no expectations weighing me down, I read everything I could find. Old textbooks volunteers dropped off, abandoned laptops with cracked screens, broken manuals from the storage closet. I didn't know what I wanted to become, only that I refused to match the version of me Garrick and Mara described on those hospital forms. Poor academic performance, low future potential, no stability, no emotional worth. Those words were stapled into my file like a death sentence, written by people who never cared enough to see me clearly. So I rewrote myself from scratch. I learned code by watching free online tutorials. I studied logistics, operational flow, crisis management, and financial rescue models. Everything that felt sharp and technical, I devoured hungrily. I built a mind they never imagined I could have, a mind that would one day become their greatest threat. I just didn't know it yet. At 18, the state let me go. No farewell party, no family waiting at the doors with balloons and encouragement, no congratulations for surviving what should have broken me. Just a plastic bag of clothes and a discharge form that said independent, as if that word meant freedom instead of abandonment. I worked night shifts wherever I could, warehouse sorting, call centers, loading docks where supervisors shouted and bodies ached. I saved every dollar like it was oxygen, sleeping in cheap rooms and eating meals that came in plastic wrappers. For years, survival was my entire personality. But in the quiet between shifts, during those long midnight hours when the world slept and I couldn't, I built something else. A digital logistics assistant first, then a small consultancy helping failing businesses reorganize their operations, then a bigger firm, then a rescue company for corporations on the edge of collapse. By 28, I wasn't rich, but I was dangerous in the way that goes unnoticed, quietly competent, emotionally steady, unattached to anyone who could break me again. 14 years after the hospital, the past found me again, unintentionally. It started with an email that landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. Distressed asset, Ravelin Pharmaceutical Supply, potential acquisition target. I opened the internal documents expecting another messy, fixable corporate corpse. Companies like these were my specialty, broken systems that needed someone with patience and precision to rebuild them. Then I saw the names in the executive roster. Garrick Vale, Executive Director. Mara Linwood, Operations Supervisor. I froze with my hand still on the mouse, my coffee going cold beside me. Not anger, not fear, something quieter. Heavier, it was closure knocking, politely but insistently. I steadied my breathing and read every line of the company's crisis file with slow, careful attention. Fraud, mismanagement, employee abuse, internal conflict, collapsed partnerships. They were ruining another life, another system, another set of people. But this time, I wasn't the powerless one in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling. If you're going to reclaim your power, you don't do it loudly. You do it carefully, methodically, with the precision of someone who learned patience the hard way. I created a shell corporation, hidden behind two others with names that sounded generic and forgettable. I concealed my involvement through holding firms that looked like any other faceless investors shuffling money across balance sheets. I launched a multi-step acquisition that would look like a routine corporate takeover to anyone watching from the outside. The board barely resisted. They were choking financially, drowning in debt and desperate for a lifeline. Within 8 weeks, I had controlling shares. Within 12, I had full authority over every decision, every hire, every policy. But they still didn't know. Garrick and Mara had no idea that the man signing their paychecks, approving their budgets, and watching their every move was the same boy they abandoned, the same boy who heard them say he wasn't worth the paperwork. I didn't reveal myself, not yet. Revenge is sweetest when you let the truth walk in slowly, not when you throw it in someone's face. I entered the company for the first time on a Monday morning, not as the owner, not as the betrayed nephew returning for vengeance, as a restructuring consultant brought in to save a failing operation. The receptionist pointed me toward the conference room with a polite smile, unaware of the storm walking past her desk. The moment I stepped inside, Garrick looked up from his phone. If he recognized me, he didn't show it. Why would he? He last saw me broken, gaunt, barely able to speak through pain and medication. That version of me lived only in hospital records now. I am 32 now, calm, measured, sharp in a suit I hadn't borrowed, with posture that spoke of confidence earned through years of silent work. Name, he asked, not even meeting my eyes for more than a second. Ronan Vale, I said quietly, letting the name settle in the air between us. He blinked once, paused, but recognition didn't come. Of course it didn't. People who discard others rarely remember their faces, but I remembered every detail of his, every wrinkle, every dismissive expression, every cruel word. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Papers were scattered across the table like evidence of chaos no one wanted to acknowledge. Garrick lounged at the head of the table, bloated with self-importance, fingers drumming impatiently. Mara sat across from him, tapping her nails against a stack of falsified reports she thought no one would ever audit. They were exactly as I remembered them, only older, more careless, and far more arrogant. Consultant, Garrick scoffed as I sat down, we didn't approve this. I smiled mildly, the kind of smile that says more than words. You don't approve of anything anymore, Mr. Vale. The board brought me in under emergency authority. His face darkened, the color rising in his cheeks, but he forced a laugh, trying to regain control of the moment. Please, I've seen men like you come and go. They don't last long here. Men like me. In his mind, I was still that silent boy on a hospital bed, unworthy of a future, unworthy of memory. Mara flipped through my credentials slowly, then looked up with that same smirk she wore the night she left me behind. Ronan Vale, she said slowly, testing the name. HM, common name. Not common enough to forget, but I remained still, unreadable, because calm is the sharpest weapon you can carry. Corporate buildings always have secrets, but this one practically whispered them to anyone willing to listen. People were afraid here. Every employee I spoke to lowered their voice instinctively, glancing around as if someone watched them constantly. The stories came out one by one, hesitant at first, then flooding. Garrick threatened staff behind closed doors, using his position like a weapon. Mara manipulated assignments, withholding resources, then blaming workers publicly for failures that were never theirs. They used intimidation as currency, power as a drug, and fear as control. I didn't react visibly to any of it. I took notes in a small leather notebook. I built files methodically, organizing every complaint, every witness statement, every piece of evidence with the care of someone building a case that couldn't be torn apart. Not for revenge, for truth. My goal wasn't to destroy them in some dramatic explosion. It was to make them finally face themselves, to hold up a mirror they'd spent years avoiding. Truth is more devastating than vengeance could ever be. Truth has weight. Truth doesn't fade. Truth waits patiently until the right moment, and then it arrives like a storm no one saw coming. On Wednesday, during an executive briefing, Garrick tossed a file across the table in front of me with deliberate force. Papers slid across the polished wood surface. Vale, he said, as if the word tasted bitter on his tongue. Your projections don't make sense. They're unrealistic. My projections were perfect. Detailed, conservative. His operations were the problem, bloated, inefficient, riddled with personal agendas instead of strategic planning. I waited, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to show his true self in front of witnesses. And he did. You know, he said in that condescending tone he always used, leaning back in his chair like a king on a throne, your kind of overconfident idealism is why weak boys fail in the real world. Weak boys. The exact phrase he used when he abandoned me 14 years ago. The same words I heard through that hospital curtain, words that burned themselves into my memory like a brand. I looked at him, smiling just slightly, the kind of smile that unsettles people because they can't read what's behind it. Is that your professional opinion, Mr. Vale? He puffed up his chest defensively. It's my personal one. Good, I needed that on record. I needed witnesses to see exactly who he was when no one was watching closely enough. Later that day, while I walked down the hall past the break room, I heard two employees whispering near the printer. Someone messed with payroll again, third time this month. It's Mara, isn't it? It's always her. She's untouchable, everyone's too scared to say anything. I turned the corner, and they froze like deer caught in headlights. Relax, I told them gently, keeping my voice low and calm. I'm just gathering information, not hunting for blame. One of them swallowed hard, eyes darting nervously. She threatened to fire me if I talked to the board about anything, said I'd never work in this industry again. That matched the intimidation claims I'd already collected from 6 other employees. A pattern was forming, clear and undeniable. Mara walked by moments later, heels clicking against the tile like gunshots echoing through a silent hallway. She barely looked at me, but her voice carried that familiar edge. You'll learn quickly, she said without stopping, that loyalty matters more than truth in this building. I held her gaze as she passed. For some people, maybe. She didn't understand why I said it, not yet, but she would. Soon enough, she would. The moment cracks appeared in their control wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, quiet, almost forgettable to anyone not watching closely. A junior accountant named Reese approached me after work one evening. The building was mostly empty, shadows stretching long across the fluorescent-lit hallways. He looked terrified, hands trembling slightly. I need to tell you something, he whispered, voice barely audible. But if they find out I talked to you, I'll lose my job, maybe worse. I guided him to an empty office, closing the door gently behind us. The lights flickered overhead, and outside the window, rain streaked down the glass like scratches clawing at the surface. He slid a folder toward me with shaking hands, as if the paper itself burned to touch. These are falsified invoices, signed by Mara, and this is Garrick's authorization on a transfer the board never approved. Money just disappeared. I opened the folder slowly, carefully. The paper smelled like old toner and fear, the scent of secrets kept too long. This was the evidence I needed, but not yet for revenge. For the truth, for justice that would stand up under scrutiny. Thank you, I said genuinely, meeting his eyes. You did the right thing. His voice cracked. Are you going to expose them? One day, but not like he imagined, not with fireworks and drama. I'm going to fix the company first, I said calmly, and when the time comes, the truth will reveal everything by itself. The next morning, I went into the executive board meeting early, before anyone else arrived. I arranged my documents carefully, laying them out in precise order. The board members filed in slowly, exhausted and worn out by years of Garrick and Mara's tyranny. They looked at me with faint hope flickering in their tired eyes, the kind of hope people have when they've been disappointed too many times to fully believe anymore. I laid out a calm, precise restructure plan, new department flows that made sense, transparency protocols that couldn't be bypassed, audit pathways that left no room for hidden transactions. Garrick slammed his fist on the table suddenly, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You don't have the authority to implement any of this. The board chairman cleared his throat, shuffling papers nervously. Actually, he does. Full restructuring control was granted last quarter under emergency provisions. Garrick blinked like he'd heard a foreign language, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and finally something close to panic. Mara stared at me from across the table, suspicion blooming behind her eyes for the first time. Her fingers stopped tapping, her posture shifted. Slowly, so slowly, the realization formed in both of them. I wasn't just another consultant they could intimidate or outlast. Not important yet, but significant enough that they could no longer treat me as disposable. The dynamic shifted, not much, just a centimeter, but a centimeter is how avalanches begin. Late that evening, I stayed behind in the office, reviewing the past authorization trails under the harsh glow of my desk lamp. The office lights dimmed automatically after hours. Outside, the parking lot was almost empty, just a few scattered cars belonging to people working late or afraid to go home. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate confidence. Garrick. He leaned on the doorframe, the kind of posture a man uses when he thinks he owns a room and everyone in it. Your trouble, he said flatly, no pretense of politeness anymore. I didn't look up from the papers spread across my desk. You think so? He stepped closer, invading the space like a predator testing boundaries. You're digging too deep. Men who dig too deep usually end up buried. I closed the folder gently, no fear flickering across my expression. No anger either, just quiet clarity, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. Tell me, Mr. Vale, I said softly, finally looking up at him, do you ever regret leaving people behind? He froze mid-step. The question hit him harder than I intended, the way truth always hits people who have spent their whole lives avoiding it. What kind of question is that? He demanded, voice rising defensively. A personal one, I replied calmly. Answer it honestly. His face reddened, veins pulsing at his temples, but he said nothing. Because deep down, somewhere beneath all the arrogance and cruelty, he knew what I meant. He just didn't know who I was yet, but the fuse was burning. And their world, so confident, so untouchable, was beginning to crack from the inside out. 2 weeks into the restructuring, HR forwarded me a sealed archive by accident. At least, that's what they said when they handed it over nervously, but I knew better. People share truth only when they're desperate for someone strong enough to hold it without breaking. Inside the archive were employee evaluations written by Garrick over the years. The language was cruel, mocking, and dismissive, the same tone he used on me when I was 17 and helpless. But then I saw something chilling that made my blood run cold. A dismissal request from 14 years ago, yellowed with age but still legible. The handwriting struck me immediately, sharp, angular, unmistakable. Mara Linwood, signature at the bottom. And below it in her own handwriting, subject will not recover, no value to family or estate. Subject. They wrote that about me, not nephew, not Ronan, subject, like I was a failed experiment they were discarding. Coldness ran through me, not hatred. I'd outgrown that years ago in those lonely rehab nights. It was the cold realization that they had always believed people existed to be used or discarded based on convenience. That chapter wasn't closed. It was waiting for this exact moment to be read again, this time with witnesses who would finally understand. Mara's footsteps were sharp that day, echoing down the hallway like warning shots. She entered the office with suspicion practically radiating from her, shoulders tense, eyes scanning everything. You've been asking too many questions, she said without preamble, standing in my doorway like an interrogator. I shrugged lightly, not looking up from my computer screen. That's what restructuring is. No, she leaned closer, voice dropping. That's what someone does when they're planning something. I held her stare, letting silence stretch between us like a tightrope. That sounds more like your specialty. Her jaw tightened, muscles flexing visibly. For the first time I saw it clearly, fear. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. Predators fear losing control more than anything else. They fear the moment their prey stops running and turns around to face them. And in that moment, standing in my office doorway, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years, the ground shifting beneath her feet. That night, a board member named Aldrin called me to an off-site cafe, far from the office where walls had ears and cameras recorded everything. The air smelled like roasted beans and rain-damp pavement, streetlights reflected in puddles like shattered mirrors. He sat hunched forward at a corner table, eyes nervous, constantly glancing toward the door. I think you need to know something, he whispered, leaning across the small table. Your presence here, it's stirring old ghosts. People are talking. I went still, hands wrapped around my coffee cup. Explain. Garrick and Mara, before they joined this company, they were involved in a family dispute, something about inheritance, custody, abandonment, legal documents that disappeared. He glanced around nervously, lowering his voice even further. They mentioned a nephew once, years ago, said he was a liability they cut loose, said it was better for everyone that he was gone. Every muscle in me tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Aldrin continued, his words coming faster now. If they realize who you are, things could escalate quickly. They aren't stable, Ronan. They're dangerous in subtle ways, the kind of people who ruin lives without leaving fingerprints. I nodded slowly, processing every word. I'm not afraid of them, I said quietly. I know, he replied, meeting my eyes, but people like them, they're afraid of the truth, and fear makes people do terrible things. During a quarterly audit presentation 3 days later, something shifted in the air. The projector flickered, casting a harsh glow across my face as I stood at the front of the room. The light caught the angle of my jaw, the shape of my mouth, the structure of my features in a way the dim office lighting never had. Mara stared at me, longer than before, harder than before. Her eyes narrowed, analyzing every detail like someone trying to solve a puzzle they almost recognized. Recognition tried to surface, fighting through years of willful forgetting and convenient dismissal. Then she said quietly, her voice cutting through the presentation, "Have we met before?" My heart didn't race, it slowed, not from fear, from control, from years of preparation for this exact moment. Calm, still, unshakable. Possibly, I answered evenly, not missing a beat. I've consulted for many companies over the years. She searched my eyes, something trembling beneath her carefully constructed exterior. Doubt flickered across her face like static on a bad television signal. But Garrick interrupted before she could dig deeper, his voice loud and dismissive. Doesn't matter, he won't be here long anyway. He said it like a promise, like a threat, like something he believed with absolute certainty. But he had no idea the ground beneath him was already eroding, one truth at a time. Late evening, a storm outside, heavy rain hammering against the windows, dripping like ticking time. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. I found a junior analyst named Myra crying in the archive room, surrounded by boxes of old files. Her hands shook as she held a termination notice, tears streaming down her face. They fired me for reporting an ethics violation, she whispered, voice breaking. I didn't even accuse anyone directly, I just asked a question about a payment discrepancy. I took the paper gently from her trembling hands. Garrick's signature was scrawled across the bottom, vindictive, petty, exactly like he always was. I sat beside her on the floor, no suit superiority, no corporate hierarchy, just a human beside another human who was hurting. Myra, I said gently, meeting her red-rimmed eyes, you're not losing your job. She blinked through tears, confused, but the form is already processed. I own the decision chain now, I said firmly. You'll stay and you'll be protected. She stared at me like I had spoken a language she'd never heard before. Kindness, protection, justice. And that moment mattered more than any revenge ever could, because justice isn't just about correcting wrongs, it's about showing people what right looks like. It's about being the person you needed when you were the one crying alone in an empty room. During a heated operations briefing the next morning, Mara finally snapped under the pressure. This entire company is failing because people don't know how to stay in their place, she shouted, slamming her hand on the conference table. Her voice echoed off the walls, sharp and cutting. Everyone in the room froze, pens stopped moving, eyes went wide. I calmly folded my arms, leaning back slightly in my chair, including you. Her eyes flamed with rage. You're provoking me deliberately. I'm asking a question, I replied evenly, one you should be able to answer if you believe what you just said. She stormed toward me, finger pointed like a weapon. I don't care who you think you are or what authority you think you have. People like you always fall apart eventually. You don't have the spine for real leadership. People like you. The exact phrasing she used when she left me in that hospital hallway 14 years ago. The same dismissive tone, the same cruel certainty. For the first time her mask cracked completely, and the whole room saw what was underneath. Not strength, not confidence, just fear and cruelty trying desperately to look like power. The staff didn't stare at me, they stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time who she really was. The shift was silent but decisive, their fear of her became doubtful. Their doubt became recognition. Their recognition became distant. Her power was slipping through her fingers like water. She knew it, I knew it, everyone in that room knew it. The office was empty that night, fluorescent lights humming above me like mechanical insects. Only their sound and the soft clicking of my keyboard kept me company. I opened my laptop and laid out everything I'd collected, the evidence, the timelines, the connections between every falsified signature, every unethical transfer, every retaliation incident, every abusive action. 21 chapters of documented truth. Not revenge, truth. Because truth is the one thing they've never been able to outrun, no matter how fast they ran or how many people they silenced. At the center of my screen was the final document, the one that would tie everything together in a way no one could deny or dismiss. Their abandonment papers, the same ones they signed when they walked out on me 14 years ago, leaving a 17-year-old boy alone in a hospital with no family, no future, and no hope. I placed them carefully into the audit packet scheduled for tomorrow's presentation, sliding them between financial reports and operational analyses. Tomorrow, the controlled detonation will begin. Tomorrow was the moment the truth stopped waiting patiently and walked through the door. Tomorrow, everything will change, not with shouting, not with chaos, with clarity, with silence, with truth finally speaking louder than their lies ever could. The boardroom was colder than usual the next morning, as if the building itself sensed what was coming. 30 people filled the seats, executives, lead supervisors, department heads, witnesses to whatever would happen next. And at the far end of the table, Garrick and Mara sat like two monarchs who believed their crowns were permanent and unshakable. I stood near the projector, hands calm, heartbeat steady. This wasn't revenge. This was the truth, finally arriving exactly on time. The chairman nodded at me. "Ronan, you may begin." The lights dimmed, the projector hummed to life. Slide 1 appeared on the screen. Internal audit findings, Phase 1. I spoke clearly, each word measured. For months, we've traced multiple discrepancies across departments, most of them laid back to 2 specific sources. Garrick scoffed loudly. Mara folded her arms tightly across her chest. I clicked to the next slide. Transfer records appeared, unauthorized payments highlighted in red, intimidation complaints documented and dated. Falsified performance evaluations with forged signatures. Each slide landed like a silent hammer striking stone. A murmur spread across the room like wildfire. People who had lived in fear were becoming witnesses to their own liberation. Then I pressed the final button. A new document appeared, old, yellowed, familiar to me like a scar I'd carried for 14 years. The abandonment papers, signed by Garrick Vale, countersigned by Mara Linwood. The room went still, not quiet, still, like time itself had stopped breathing. Someone whispered, What is this?" I finally looked directly at them, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "This," I said, "is where your pattern began." Garrick jolted to his feet, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is the meaning of this? That document has nothing to do with this company." "Oh, it does," I replied calmly. "Patterns always do. Behavior doesn't change, it just finds new victims." Mara's face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Where did you get those papers?" she whispered, voice barely audible. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "When I was 17, you left a boy in a hospital bed and told the staff he had no worth, no value, no future, that he wouldn't survive." Gasps filled the room like oxygen being sucked out. Garrick stuttered, face going red then white. What are you talking about? Who?" My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "You don't remember him, that boy you abandoned." I removed my company badge slowly and placed it on the table in front of them. "My name is Ronan Vale, your nephew, your responsibility, according to state records, your burden, according to your own signatures on legal documents." Mara stumbled backward, knocking into her chair. Garrick's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. They finally recognized me, not because I looked the same, but because there was something in my eyes they had seen once before and tried to forget. Not a weakness, not desperation, endurance, survival, strength they never imagined I could build from the ashes they left behind. Mara made the first desperate attempt to regain control, her voice sharp and defensive. "This is a setup," she spat. "He altered those documents, this is manipulation." These documents, I said calmly, picking up the papers, were pulled directly from government archives, independently verified by legal counsel, dated, signed, logged, and sealed. There's a paper trail that can't be erased. I turned to face the board members who sat frozen in their seats. They abandoned a minor in a hospital. They falsified evaluations here in this company. They manipulated staff through intimidation. They jeopardized company operations for personal gain. And every one of these actions aligns with the same behavior pattern, a pattern of treating people as disposable. Garrick's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. You think you can ruin us with ancient paperwork, with some sob story from years ago. I shook my head gently, almost sadly. No, Garrick, you ruined yourselves. I'm simply presenting the truth you thought would never catch up to you. For the first time in their lives, the room wasn't theirs. Authority didn't bend toward them. Power didn't kneel at their feet. Fear didn't silence the people they'd hurt. They were small now, just two people standing in front of consequences they thought would never find them. The chairman cleared his throat, his voice heavy with finality. Effective immediately, you are both suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out. The staff exhaled, long, shaky, relieved. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat straighter, shoulders finally relaxing after years of tension. Justice wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was quiet and absolute. After the meeting ended, Garrick and Mara waited for me near the elevator. They wanted a fight, some desperate confrontation, some final battle where they could reclaim even a shred of dignity. Instead, I stood calmly, briefcase in hand, expression neutral. You planned this, Garrick said, voice hollow. You waited years for this moment. This was always about revenge. No, I said quietly. I waited years to become someone who didn't need revenge. There's a difference. Mara wiped at her eyes angrily, mascara smudging. What do you want from us now? An apology? Money? Some kind of public confession? No, I answered, meeting her eyes. I want nothing from you. I outgrew needing anything from you a long time ago. They stared at me, confused, defeated, unable to comprehend a world where their validation didn't matter anymore. The difference between us, I continued quietly, my voice steady as stone, is simple. You left me because you believed I had no worth. I confronted you because I know mine. The elevator opened behind me with a soft chime. Ronan, Mara called out, voice breaking. I looked back once, just once. Some truths, I said, don't hurt you until they're spoken out loud, and some people don't realize what they lost until it's standing right in front of them. The doors closed between us like the final page of a chapter that had waited 14 years to be written. And as the elevator descended, I felt something I hadn't felt since that hospital night, complete. So if you're listening to this now, or in that hospital bed right now, literally or figuratively, broken, alone, wondering if you'll survive this, asterisk. You will, not because it's easy, not because someone will save you, but because you'll save yourself. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one quiet victory at a time. And years from now, when the people who abandoned you finally see who you became, they won't recognize you. Not because you changed your appearance, but because you outgrew the version of yourself they tried to bury. Stand up, rebuild, rise. The world is waiting to meet the person you're becoming. Like, share, and follow for more stories that prove strength isn't given, it's built in the quiet moments no one sees.